Okay, good afternoon to all our listeners tuning in from around the world. This is Michelle Lopez. I'm an EMT from Mexico, and today we're thrilled to kick off our new segment, MEDUCAST Insights Global Emergencies. We have the distinct honor of engaging in a conversation with an extraordinary individual. Please welcome Dr. Derrick Tin. Dr. Derrick is an associate professor in critical care medicine at the University of Melbourne and a faculty member at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and Harvard Medical School Disaster Medicine Fellowship. Dr. Ting will be sharing his expertise on the topic of counterterrorism medicine. Dr. Derrick, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you for joining MEDUCAST.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for inviting. It's a pleasure to be here today and looking forward to our chat.
Well, thank you to everyone who is listening to us. And well, let's dive into this critical discussion. Okay, we have one question for you, Doctor. The first one is, how does the field of medicine contribute to counterterrorism efforts, particularly in responding to biological threats?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think first off, we need to understand that our knowledge of personal protection equipment has dramatically increased since COVID, but also our awareness of the potential devastation biological threats pose has obviously increased. Now, it's important to realize that terrorist bioweapons have historically actually been very rare. Out of the CBRN, the chemical, bio, radiation, nuclear modalities, you are by far more likely to encounter a terrorist chemical weapon than a biological one, because most terrorist organizations just don't have the resources to build or manage a bioweapon, whereas a lot of the chemical weapons are relatively more readily available given the industrial sector uses a lot of them. Now, having said that, what we're now really faced with is much more complex. You know, the delineation between war, which is state versus state, terrorism, which is non-state versus civilian, and crime, which is everything else, generally civilian versus civilian, is now much more blurred. And what we potentially have are these rogue states that have the finance and the resource and expertise unofficially backing non-state entities to create havoc. And this is difficult because now this bypasses the rules of Biological Weapons Convention and provides non-state groups with the resources that they did not have before. Artificial intelligence is also problematic because algorithms now can and have created novel bioweapons in a matter of hours that was previously unknown to us. And the legislation of AI is still very much lagging in terms of how do we regulate this new technology. But really, to answer your question, how can the medical world help? Number one, I think we need to understand the existing biological threats, which is something we don't do very well in terms of educating medical staff on these topics. Number two, I think we need to be a voice that matters. You know, aim for leadership positions when discussions around CBRN occurs at a high government level. And three, of course, is to learn more about counterterrorism medicine, a growing field that touches on all these topics.
Okay, Doctor, thank you so much about the answer of this question. I guess that all our audience, because a big part of our audience are students or the new healthcare professionals, and this will be very interesting for them. And as a curiosity of myself, could you please tell us exactly what does counterterrorism medicine means?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, counterterrorism medicine is really trying to understand. It's quite new, number one, and the definition will change over time, just like disaster medicine. The scope of what we do changes over time, but at the core of it, I think it's really about understanding the healthcare impacts of intentional events, right? So anything that can affect population health in a negative way is what really counterterrorism medicine is about. It could be something like a cybersecurity, cyber threat, right? How does that impact the healthcare system? And ultimately, how does that impact our patients? Or it could be a terrorism event. How does the psychological impact differ from an accidental event? How does the financial impact differ? And how does the clinical differences differ? And there are some subtle differences there.
Okay, well, wow, it's new for me, and I guess that a lot of people from my country and from this side of the world will be a little bit new this term, as you already explained to us, because it's not common for us this kind of medicine or this kind of events. But as you explained to us, and our audience needs to understand that doesn't need to be exactly a terrorism event for the counterterrorism medicine. So thank you so much for the explanation, Doctor. Doc, what are the key medical preparedness measures that healthcare systems implement to address potential terrorist attacks involving chemical agents?
Yeah, firstly, I think we need to be part of these security discussion groups. So no matter where you live, which country you're in, there are always going to be regional or federal CVRN groups, security groups, counterterrorism groups, assessing the risks to the population. Of course, sometimes everyone gets caught out, but if you're not even part of what's available, then you are really in the blind. And this is what we see in the medical sector. We're often siloed away from all these discussions. Second, I think we run a lot of multi-agency tabletop simulations. We do this with security, fire, ambulance, hospitals to simulate an attack, for example, and see how we all respond, how we all work or don't work with each other. And through these sorts of training exercises, we start spotting a lot of problematic areas. Now, the problem with many tabletops today is that they are done in silo. Once again, each agency does their own. So fire services do their own fire drills, medical agencies, organizations do our own medical drills, and they create this simulation that sort of suits their resources. So when they're done, they feel like, yes, everything is good. And I always say, if everything is good after a tabletop, it's because it wasn't designed well, and you have literally learned not a lot because you haven't really addressed many of the important issues like communication failures, which is one of the biggest common issue between responding agencies in a disaster. And there are just a few of many other points when it comes to the medical aspects of chemical attacks, right? There's decontamination protocols we can do better, PPE protocols, toxidrome recognition, antidote stockpiling, treatment guidelines, etc., etc. The list really goes on.
Okay, well, it's a lot of things that we need to take in mind when we are talking about how do we can prepare ourselves for doing this, and our systems as well. Actually, just talking about the toxic syndromes and the contamination and everything, the last week we just have one interview in our podcast with a doctor, a toxicology doctor, and she explained us about this topic a little bit more. So for all our audience, you can go and check that. And to be more sure about what we are talking and what the doctor is trying to explain to us right now. So talking about the medical team and the staffs from the counterterrorism, could you explain to us the role of medical intelligence in preventing acts of terrorism and responding to them effectively?
Yeah, so once again, it really goes back to what we were saying earlier about being part of that roundtable discussion with security and counterterrorism experts. It's really about building situational awareness. It's about the early collaboration and building relationships with non-medical agencies. It's about gathering information so you can better risk assess the threats and build early warning systems, develop countermeasures, and all of this will help guide the strategic planning of healthcare systems, public health agencies, and emergency responders.
Okay, doctor. So for our students or our new healthcare providers in the audience, it's very important, as the doctor explained to us and said a couple of times, that we need to work together with another systems, and we need to be prepared to work with people that are not training in medical issues but are training to manage this kind of awareness or this kind of public safety stuffs. So right now, talking about a little bit more from the medical perspective, what are the challenges and ethical considerations that healthcare professionals face when dealing with victims of terrorism, especially in conflicted zones?
Yeah, Michelle, I mean, that's where do you start? That's a big question, right? Now, working in a conflict zone is difficult and dangerous, so you will have to understand your personal safety and security risks. You will probably need to have hostile environment training. You will need to learn how to prioritize limited resources, and you have to monitor your own and your colleagues' mental health from the trauma you may see, from the hardship you may experience, from the helplessness some might feel, and from the collateral damage that you may experience that. And that's something that often happens. So there's a lot of considerations that day to day in the civilian world, we don't really think about too much because we take these things sort of a bit for granted. Now, ethically, you may have to treat the perpetrators of the conflict, right? You may have to treat terrorists, and you may have to treat people who attacked others. Criminals, you may have a personal political view that contradicts what your colleagues are saying or thinking. And we see this across the globe in the last couple of years, very divided political stance, right? And you know what they say, what some call terrorists are the call freedom fighters. So where do you stand? You know, how do you keep your professionalism whilst you may be personally very conflicted in terms of your political views? So, and then you may decide this is too much. I can't work in this environment. This is not what I signed up for. And you may have to abandon your colleagues or patients for your own health and safety. And all these are very difficult ethical dilemmas that are also very realistic. And I think during COVID, even though it wasn't a conflict zone, it wasn't victims of terrorism, when there's an element of threat to your own health, it really changes the dynamics. You know, yes, we may be applauded by the rest of the world, but as many, you know, doctors, nurses have pointed out, we joined the profession to help people, but we didn't join the profession to sacrifice our own lives, right? So, and this has been widely discussed in the media across the world at the height of COVID. So yeah, there are many difficult things to consider that you may not have previously thought about.
Okay, Doc. You mentioned about our own safety and our colleagues' safety, and also about our mental health. In your point of view, Doctor, could you please tell us how can we, as health providers, help to our mates or our team when we have like this kind of stress situations, about talking about counterterrorism medicines, please?
Yeah, again, this is a very big topic, right? So what we're generally quite good at is responding to someone who's traumatized, right? This is what the psychologists do, right? Someone's had trauma, they're not doing well. We go and send help, okay? And help them get back to where they need to be. But what really, from my personal perspective, is really we need to pivot from responding to someone who's traumatized to trying to prevent them from being traumatized. And how do we do that? Well, we can screen better. So it's about understanding your pre deployment risk factors, right? If someone's got a history of anxiety, if someone's got a history of mental health disorders, if someone's got, bad childhood trauma or certain triggers that may be bad for this environment, we should know about this beforehand, because then that allows us to control the amount of exposure they have, or to basically say, you know what, you're really at risk, and deploying you into this environment might not be a good idea because it's going to aggravate things. But we don't do that. Has anyone asked us during COVID or before COVID, hey, are you going to be okay dealing with this? No, they just throw us in, right? Interestingly, the military does that very well. So when you join the military, not only you have a physical health screen, you have a very robust psychological screen where they're checking all these things to make sure that the risk factors are at least either known and contained or managed, right? So that is the pre-exposure risk. And then during the exposure, then there are certain things we can't control, like the amount of trauma. But what we can control is exposure time of that person in. So if you and I go into the same scene and you react really badly in the first hour, I already know through evidence, through science, that you are much more likely to develop problems later down the line. Right. So I may think, hey, you know what, Michelle, you're reacting badly. You may have some risk factors. We need you. Let's expose you at limited exposure and pull you out and let someone else continue. And these are things we don't do well because we're often short-staffed, right? The departments during COVID, and even now after COVID, we just don't have the luxury to pull people back because we need them. But by doing them, you're also continuing the trauma, and the recovery period may be very, very prolonged. So there are many things we can do that we still don't do very well.
Okay, doctor, thank you very much. And it's very important to everyone or in our audience to understand that mental health is as important as the physical health, and that it's if it's needed in the healthcare system that we work to involve a psychological area or a person who treats medical health. It's very important to have it, and it's very important to recognize that we need to go as healthcare providers, because we see a lot of things, we see a lot of suffering in our areas, and ourselves get involved in a lot of these situations. So it's very important, this point, as you explained to us, Doc. And the last and for not least, Doctor, in what ways has technology advanced the field of medical counterterrorism, and how does it assist in early detection and rapid response to potential threats?
Yeah, I mean that's a relatively easy one. If you look at the detection tools, the mass spectrometers and the other tools used in detecting chemicals, like anything with technological advances, they are getting smaller, they're getting cheaper, and the processing is getting faster. And there are now many more point of care devices which are quite portable on the market that enables quicker identification of the offending chemical. And obviously, once you identify what the substance is from a chemical threat perspective, then we know how to manage it much better, right? And really the key is identifying. So right now, those systems are still quite expensive, and you still need multiple devices to do different jobs, and they still take time. But that will undoubtedly change with time as technology advances. So I think that's probably one of the biggest areas, cheaper, quicker, more portable tools to help us detect and respond to these threats.
Okay, and for the of an au contraire about the technology advance in the terrorism, how does this affects the treating and the medical assessment for the patients when we have technology involved in these kind of situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, say, the Tokusan gas attack, right, one of the major issues was a delay in identifying the toxic substance.
Okay.
Same with the Moscow theater siege, the lack of early knowledge of what the chemical was meant that people suffered. So if we can quickly go in and figure out, okay, we know what this is, then we can quickly treat, because most of these are not new things on the market, chlorine gas or whatever it is. So yeah, so understand early detection, I think, is still key to managing patients and victims of chemical attacks.
Okay, doctor. Well, Dr. Derrick, would you like to share any final thoughts before we conclude this episode?
Yeah, I mean, this is a field that I'm really passionate about. I think, there's a lot of need for research. There's a lot of interest in the field, and I encourage you guys to really look at it from a different angle, and help this field flourish. It really needs people to drive this, right? And I think at one point we think of terrorism events as very rare, it won't happen
Mm-hmm.
here. But if you name me a capital city around the world, Paris, Vegas, New York, Sydney, London, like all these capital cities, um, terrorist events have happened. And a lot of the lectures we talk about and we give are actually backed by a lot of evidence. So but we can only grow if there's more research in this field as well. So I encourage you guys to look at it from a research perspective and say, hey, how can I do some research, and reach out? I'm always happy to collaborate and chat more about this.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. It has been an absolute honor to have you as our distinguished guest in this new segment and to share insights about medicine with you and our global audience. We hope that this information reaches far and wide, preparing more professionals for the challenges ahead and to make them be curious about these topics, about these type of medicine that it's also a huge amount of information and a big area for the medicine. We also want to extend our heartfelt thanks to all those who are part of MEDUCAST as you, Doctor. MEDUCAST is the podcast made by MEDUCATE. At this moment, we are proud to say that we have over 100 followers and over 500 listeners around the world in Spotify. So without you and all our guests or our experts in here, none of this will be possible. So we are so thankful with you, our guests, our audience. Thanks to you, Doctor, and everything's
Thanks,
possible
Michelle.
with you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you inviting me onto your podcast, and yeah, thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure, Doug. Well, this has been everything in this episode. We send to you warm greetings from Mexico, and we wish those of you who are finishing your shifts a well-deserved rest. And for those just starting your shift, may it be a smooth and enjoyable shift. And see you until next time.